Hey everyone, this is Andy Hall, and with me today is Dale McGowan. And I'm going to be honest with you all. Dale, I usually start off reading people's bios, but Dale has one of these incredible bios that just goes on forever and ever and ever. I'm going to give you some bullet points. Dale, a music and evolutionary anthropology major at UC Berkeley back in the day, which is like incredible. You were wise, sir, to get out of psychology. I heard that you were going to be a psych major, you were a psych major at a certain point and shifted gears there. Dale, of course, is a composer extraordinaire, conducting at college. You're an associate professor at St. Catherine University. While you were teaching there, you were doing music theory, music history, orchestration, as well as interdisciplinary courses centered on writing and critical thinking. Very impressive. And of course, with your non-religious life, I mean, your accomplishments, they number legion. That's what they do, throwing it back to Jesus and the devil there. Sharing reality, the books, the Sharing Reality, Parenting Beyond Belief, Raising Freethinkers, Voices of Unbelief, and of course, Atheism For Dummies, amongst other books. And I feel guilty that I haven't read your satirical novels. You know that? That's what I feel. I feel guilty about that. It's maybe the Baptist in me. I feel guilty and angry. That's the Baptist part. There's the guilt that automatically gets shunted into anger.
Yeah, I understand.
And I'd be remiss if we didn't mention that little humanist nonprofit foundation that you created, Foundation Beyond Belief. I think I'd be remiss about that. And of course, you're the managing editor of the non-religious writers at Pathio. So that means you're an expert in cat wrestling. Yeah. And you're currently teaching, and I'm going to just butcher the name of the university you're teaching at currently, Oglethorpe? Or Oglethorpe?
Oglethorpe. That's right.
Well, I was pretty much near the mark on that. And so, Dale, welcome. Glad to have you on, sir.
Thank you. Thanks. Good to be here.
I was talking with Corey Ryan Forrester last Friday. He's a comedian for the Well-Read Comedy Tour. He travels with, when comedians still traveled, he travels with Trey Crowder, the liberal redneck. And Corey lives up in Chickamauga. I know you're in Georgia, or last time we talked, you were in Georgia. And Corey, who is in Chickamauga, right by the border, I guess, there up in northern Georgia.
Yeah,
right
near Chattanooga.
Yes, basically said that wearing a mask is an act of courage where he was.
It might be where he is. Yeah, I live in a different state within Georgia. Atlanta and the suburbs are really a different world. It's not 100% here, but it's much more sane. People are. It's less of a complete denial of reality than you would get elsewhere. It's a pretty relatively blue area, which is interesting because 20 years ago it wasn't. It's really Atlanta itself has been, but the suburbs used to be white Republican Baptist, and it's much more diverse now. So not near, but 20 minutes north of here, Chickamauga would be a little more than an hour north of here. It's another planet. It really is.
Is there a demarcation zone? Is there like a ring road that separates the blue areas from the red area?
Well, there's a demilitarized zone, and we get our binoculars out and look at each other every once in a while. But no, the problem is that there isn't a line there, so you don't know. You're just driving, and then all of a sudden you start to see the Confederate flags, and it's so gradual that you're in it before you can really do anything about it. So.
Right. Well, that's the nature of horror stories, right? You're in stuff. And I might be jumping around a bit, but I was listening to the episode of your wonderful podcast, How Music Does That, the Pokemon episode. Ooh. And I swear to my fictitious God, Dale, I haven't been that scared. Because I was listening to it around like 6 o'clock in the morning. I'm going, how freakish is that? And just like any good horror story, just when you think it's like you're really creeped out, it gets creepier.
Much worse. Yeah. It's interesting because when I first came across the urban legend associated with this thing, which is that there's this in the Pokemon game, there's a Lavender Town setting that you go into, which is the most insanely creepy concept anyway. It's this place where Pokemon, dead Pokemon are buried. And that's the first time that you learn that Pokemon die, first of all, as a kid. And then it's haunted by their spirits that try to, get you when you pass through Lavender Town. It's just suddenly the whole sort of bright Pokemon universe darkens right there. But there's this music associated with it, this music that plays in Lavender Town that drove hundreds of Japanese children to kill themselves. No, really. And the thing is, when you listen to it, it's interesting. So in the episode, I talk about what's actually going on musically in this theme, and sort of take it apart and say, okay, it is really creepy, and here's why. But then I found out, while I was doing the research for it, I found out that that's the tame version. That's the, I think it was the Americanized version or something like that. The original version of it is way worse, much creepier. With these semitones and just it's really, you listen to it in the dark, at 6 a.m. I wouldn't recommend that. But yeah, it was a fascinating. I love, I was an anthropology major as well, focused on the physical side, but you also take a lot of cultural anthropology, no matter what your emphasis is. And we got into folklore, and I love the urban legend stuff. It's just fantastic. The internet has just taken that to 11. So that episode just looks musically at what exactly is going on in those songs that make them so over the top creepy.
I want to just let everyone know that if they listen to one episode of your podcast, How Music Does That, you got to check out that Pokemon.
Oh, great. Yeah,
really, it's just
it's been one of the more popular ones. Yeah.
Right. I want to say hello to some people in the chat. Brainbug, how you doing? Santi the Saint. I don't know how you found us here, not being in the same mold. Just I can speak for myself. Blazing Pope, Joan, Blazing Wizard Pope. Who wrote the music? Elf. So, any idea about who wrote the score to that creepy Pokemon?
No, I don't remember if there was an attribution on it. Sometimes there isn't for those things, especially in the early ones. But I'm not sure who that was. Right. They died anyway right after they wrote it. So
And so what I found interesting about that story, and you unpacked it very nicely in the episode, is that there are all these ingredients to it. You had a bit of satanic panic.
Mm-hmm.
You had an urban myth, and all the Venn diagrams seem to converge together into this hype around it, that this song made all these Japanese school children commit suicide, which of course they didn't.
Right. Yeah, I should make that clear.
Right.
I said it with a straight face, but yeah.
Yeah, you did say it with a straight face. Well, that was my job, to make sure that people didn't think that kids were actually committing suicide. Though there was this incident, and you mentioned this too in the episode, about the kids going through these epileptic seizures.
Yeah, and that's the sort of thing that can launch an urban legend, is that there's this tiny grain of truth in that there were some strobe effects, I think is what it was, in one of the scenes that were caused a couple of kids to have seizures, and then they modified the thing. Well, that's just the sort of thing that gets sort of half overheard and then turns into this mass suicide thing. Right.
I'm gonna admit to something, Dale. I'm going to admit that whenever I hear "Ode to Joy," I always think of Die Hard.
That makes sense. Yeah.
In fact, because it isn't just the scene that Alan Rickman and his lick spittle opens up the vault, and "Ode to Joy" comes pouring out along with a light and a little bit of wind. I don't know how they got wind on the inside of a bank going through, Alan's hair, but it's just freaking majestic.
Perfect. Yeah.
I was listening to your episode on Beethoven and saying, man, I got to get my my Die Hard fixed. Just that scene, that 30-second clip on YouTube.
Oh yeah,
I had to get to.
Yeah,
but you know, I was talking to my girlfriend, much smarter person than I am, went to Rice University, and we were talking one day about reading and how a lot of people don't hear their own voice in their heads when they're reading. And to me, being an idiot, this was like an epiphany. It's like, what do you mean you don't hear something in your head when you're reading? She goes, well, when I'm reading fiction, I'll hear the characters' voices in my head. But when I'm just reading, I don't know, something for work, just silence. It's like that was like an epiphany for me. To your Beethoven episode, we know it's commonly known that he was deaf for a good portion of his life.
Right.
And you went in depth about, you know, his process of composing. I was curious, are there people who compose and don't hear the music at all? Oh
yeah. Oh, absolutely. I did that. All music majors do that. Anybody who is going through a course of study actually has to do that on their exams. There are times when you actually have to create a 4-part harmonization of a melody or something like that. And one of the things I mentioned in the episode is that you're not allowed to whistle or hum in your theory finals. You know, if you did that, everyone would kill you. Right. So it has to be entirely internal, and you're not even hearing it so much as thinking it. You know, when you learn the grammar and syntax of music, when you learn the way chords flow together, the way chord progressions work, and all that sort of thing, you can then construct something without hearing it and have a pretty good idea of what it's going to sound like. You know, you can know that, yeah, that's legit. It's never the same as hearing it. You know, it's never going to be quite the same as the experience of hearing it. But right. But absolutely, I could sit down right now and write a completely credible, you know, mediocre string quartet or something without ever hearing a note of it, and it would pass. It would be entirely legit. But the amazing thing about Beethoven is that he not only wrote, you know, brilliantly, especially in his later period when he was completely deaf, but he actually changed the course of music. He actually created entirely new ways of moving through harmony, entirely new forms and counterpoint and all that, without being able to hear it, without being able to check up on it. And that's amazing. That's more amazing than writing when you're deaf.
Do you think he came up to this process because he couldn't hear?
Yeah, that's a common question. It's a really good question. Did he move in these different directions because he was, you know, would he have been backed off of it if he was able to hear it and check it? And knowing what we know about his personality, knowing that he was always, you know, barreling forward, you know, from the time that he broke free of the sort of classical constraints, he was always barreling forward. My guess is that he might have gone further. He might actually have gone further and, you know, really pushed harmony in I keep saying harmony, but a lot of different aspects of music, even further than he did if he was able to check up on it. So he made revolutionary changes, but it's not hard for me to picture him pushing toward the 20th century, you know, really 100 years early if he had been able to check on it. He just had that personality and he had the skills.
I was reading back in the day, Thomas Kuhn's The Structure of Scientific Revolutions. It was when that paradigm idea came across. So you're nodding your head, so you understand what's going on. So from what I understand from reading the book, like many, many years ago, a lot of these big changes in fields come because of technical innovations. Was there anything technically going on in the world of music around Beethoven's time that might have spurred him on?
Oh, absolutely. The piano. The piano was not, well, it was certainly not ready for prime time before Beethoven's time. It was in the middle of the 1700s that things started to move from the harpsichord, which is a lame instrument. I'm so sorry. But
you pluck the harpsichord, right?
Yeah.
You pluck it.
The key has a goose quill on the end of this, so you press a key just like a piano, and it has a goose quill that plucks the string. Yeah. So it's dynamically, it's weak. Timbrally, it's only got the one timbre, and you can't get a lot of volume out of it because a harpsichord has a wood frame, and if you tighten the strings enough to get more volume, it'll break the frame. So they had to create an iron frame like they've got in pianos, so that you can really crank those strings up to tons of tensile strength and get these phenomenal dynamic ranges. Plus the mechanism of the piano, instead of a little goose quill going past a string, it's actually this bizarre Rube Gold. I don't know if you've ever seen the inside of a piano key, but it's this Rube Goldberg device of hinges and capstans and rods and dowels and all that sort of thing, that it can either magnify your striking of the key so that you get this real high volume, throws the hammer against the string, or it can take up the slack and play incredibly softly, even more softly than you're pushing the key. So that combination was in place. The piano was ready for prime time before he went deaf. He went deaf in the very early 1800s. 1803 was when he started to really write about it. And the piano was a technological leap that made all sorts of, you're able to hear harmony in a different way. You're able to, it had a wider range than the harpsichord. So yeah, that was an enormous part of launching music forward. And then, the things that Beethoven did, I talk about this in the episode, changed every kind of music that came later. Rock music is different than it would have been if it weren't for Beethoven. Musicals and popular music and everything that we can name has a lot of the roots of what make it great in what he did during that time. And a lot of it he couldn't even check on. He couldn't even hear.
Someone from the chat, Brainbug, asks, wasn't the clavichord an intermediary innovation between, I guess, the harpsichord and the piano? The clavichord? Was that like a missing link? I guess that's the question.
It's kind of an overlapping. I wouldn't say so much, right in between as a missing link as in some ways even lamer, even more limited instrument than the harpsichord. I mean, it was really, as much as anything, was the kind of thing for private practice and for playing at home, more than anything. There were just the 18th century was an actually very cool bunch of experiments in keyboard instruments. The clavichord is in there, and the harpsichord, and a number of others before they finally come up with the pianoforte, which is the first name, and then they flipped it. So, yeah.
Starting out this show today, I bet you didn't think that you'd be trash talking clavichords.
Oh, no, I always do. I never miss an opportunity to trash talk clavichords. No matter what the topic is, I'm going, man, you better start talking about clavichords.
That's fantastic. Anna from the chat says that, asks you to talk about the Simpsons theme. Is there something special about the Simpsons theme? My plebeian ears don't pick up anything remarkable, but is there something special?
There is.
Okay.
Yeah, there really is. It's the tritone, the particular musical interval, the tritone. If you go yadam, that interval, yadam, it can have two different effects depending on tempo and instrumentation and all that. It can be scary because it's really quite dissonant. If you play those two notes together. It shows up in horror films all the time. It was actually banned by the Catholic Church for 1,000 years. During the medieval period, or the Christian Church, I guess it was overall. During the medieval period, a tritone, you were not permitted to play or sing a tritone in church because it was called diabolos in musica, the devil in music, and because it was so dissonant. It has a ratio of 8 to 17 or something between the two notes. Very complicated ratio, which means it's dissonant. But the thing is, if you go up tempo, yeah, it goes from scary to silly. It's really funny. And Elfman was alluding to, he does all sorts of allusions to West Side Story in, there are two allusions just in that theme. One of them is that interval, which is like Maria, the Simpsons, right?
Right.
He actually was modeling it on the Jetsons. Meet George Jetson, right? That's the actual direct thing, but there's also this echo of that. There's also the trumpet that comes in later in the Simpsons theme, which goes ya-da-da-dum, right?
Yeah. Now that you say that, yeah.
That's from Something's Coming from West Side Story. Ya-da-da-dum. So he's got all these sort of, inside joke Easter egg things going on. Plus, it's just great. It's just great. It's got all sorts of Danny Elfman devices in there that he then overuses through the rest of his career. He in a good way. I mean that as with love. Sure. But tritones, he beats the tritone to death in all sorts of film scores and all that sort of thing. He loves that instrumental combination, like the xylophone and the saxophone. I love Danny Elfman. He's absolutely fantastic. But I don't think he's done all sorts of great things, but I don't think anything was more on target for the task than the Simpsons theme. It's just a perfect fit.
I want to go back to not hearing the music as you compose it. Was there a point in your career, in your education, that you were hearing the music and then it just went to the process, just to like the process, and you just maybe you forgot about listening to the music in your own head and it just went into writing it? I'm curious.
Yeah. Well, I think one of the things that I'd certainly say what happened for me is that when it gets to a certain level of complexity, you can't hear it in your head. This is one of the things that I talk about in the Beethoven episode, that there's this, when you say Beethoven was deaf, he couldn't hear the music, and people say, oh, he heard it in here. No, he didn't. He knew what it would sound like. But actually hearing the music in your head you're imparting this sort of, superhero ability to somebody that is overblown. There's a limit to the complexity of musical sound that you can hold in your head. And he wrote music of just second movement of the Ninth Symphony. There's so much going on. It's just so absolutely fantastic. He can know what it's going to sound like and at the same time not be hearing it, So that's and to say otherwise, I think always sort of robs him of part of his story. It was a tragedy. If you say, oh, he heard it, it really robs him of the thing that I think is most difficult to take in the Beethoven story, which is that he was robbed of the experience that other people had of hearing his music. He got to see audiences absolutely, just in tears after the premiere of the Ninth Symphony, and he couldn't have that same experience. So anyway, I argue that point in the Beethoven episode because I'm sure a lot of people are going to just say, yes, he could. But anyway, so I think for me, it reaches a point of complexity where you're working with the abstractions of harmony and counterpoint. And again, always knowing what it's going to sound like, but that's different from hearing it.
Right. That's interesting. So when you're teaching composition, teaching how to compose music, are there exercises, not just the maths maybe or the grammar of music, but what kind of exercises does a would-be composer have to do? Like in improv, for example, they teach you a lot of exercises. Yeah, to be good in the pocket, so to speak, and to be in the moment. Is there anything like that with composing?
Yeah, there is. You actually start with something called modeling in introductory composition courses, where they will say, for example, write a minuet in the style of Mozart. So that's one of the things that you start with. So you're going to write it's not going to be a Mozart minuet, but it's in the style of Mozart where you're using the kinds of techniques and non-harmonic tones and melodic structures and form and phrases that Mozart would use to create a new Mozart minuet. And then that's done, and they'll say, okay, now write a piano sonata movement in the style of Beethoven. And you continue through that kind of a process, gradually internalizing what has been done before, internalizing the language of other composers. And then from that, you start to depart and create your own, develop your own language, your own approach. So it's like a writer reading a lot. And then if you were to write in the style of Hemingway, they have those Hemingway competitions where write in the style of Hemingway, a short story. It's the same kind of idea. If you walk around in the shoes of somebody who's done it before, then you can figure out how to depart from it. So that's one of the early things that I think most composers go through.
That's fascinating. Do you find any students, like new students, freshmen, your students, that don't want to do that? That they just want to do what they want to do?
Oh, absolutely. And I have to clarify something. First of all, I don't teach composition, and I never have taught it. Yeah. One of the reasons is that I'm a crap composer. I'm an absolutely terrible. My PhD is in composition. I understand composition. I know how it works. I could teach it, but I'm terrible.
Right.
Nobody else is listening to this, right?
No, of course.
Yeah. I teach music theory, music history, orchestration. Right now I'm mostly teaching music appreciation, that sort of thing. But the answer to your question is, there are a lot of students that rebel against that. And one of the famous examples of it was Maurice Ravel. He went to teach, he went to learn from Nadia Boulanger, who was one of she's considered the great teacher of composition in the 20th century. Lived in Paris, and she taught Stravinsky and Aaron Copland and Roger Sessions. I mean, just this she's had more of an impact on music than anyone else in the 20th century. Nadia Boulanger died in the 80s at 112 years old or whatever. She really had a good long career. But a lot of friends said to Ravel, hey, you ought to go study with Nadia. And he said, oh, I am the great Ravel, because he was already the great Ravel. And he said, what do I have to learn from her? Well, everybody does this. You should do that. So he went to her, and she sat him down, and she said, first thing I want you to do is write a minuet in the style of Mozart. And he said, I am the great Ravel. And he left. And his friends told him he was an idiot, and he went back and he wrote a minuet in the style of Ravel. And then she said, okay, now what I want you to do is take this Bach chorale. So this is a 20-minute chorale for, choir and soloists and orchestra and the whole, it's a huge piece of music. And I want you to recopy every note. Just take the notes that Bach wrote and recopy it on another thing. And he said, I'm the great Ravel. This is ridiculous. But she convinced him to do it. And the thing is, when you do that, when you actually take every single note that another composer has written and recopy it, the process of doing that gets you inside the composition, gets you inside the compositional process to such an extent. And he said these were the most valuable things he ever did in his career, was going to work with Nadia, getting over his ego, and actually, being able to do these things that seem like elementary exercises that he hadn't done before. Somehow he hadn't been asked to do that before in his education.
I wonder if there is a difference between composing by hand, and I suppose you can compose by keyboard, being a Luddite. I mean, I imagine that's a thing.
Sure.
But I know that people remember better when they write by hand. Like if you're writing out note cards, for an example, for an exam, it's better than just downloading note cards and maybe printing them up, whatever. So I wonder if there's a different neurological pathway that gets activated if you're doing it by hand as against to just typing.
I'm sure that's it. I'm sure that's an element of it. For exactly that reason. I mean, it's been demonstrated in other fields. I don't know why that wouldn't be the case for music composition.
Right. Why B flat?
Why not B flat?
Is it like chocolate ice cream? Is it just that that's something that you like and there's no explanation for it? And we should back up about the question about B flat too.
Yeah.
That was just throwing it out there. From what I understand, that's your favorite key?
Oh, I know what you're talking about. you're talking about a story where I was to write something to accompany a bagpipe. I was when I was in college, at University of California, Berkeley, the band was going to play Amazing Grace along with a bagpiper. And I was asked what key I wanted to put it in. And I said, he said, what's your favorite key? And I said, B flat, because that's my favorite key for band. The reason it's my favorite key for band is that it's the easiest key for band. You've got a lot of different instruments. The instruments are actually based in different keys. You have instruments in F and in B flat and in C and all that. And the place where they meet, the place where they are all happiest, they have the least accidentals to write, is B flat. So not actually my favorite key. If A flat, D flat, that gets into some of my favorites. And it's I don't know why, because for the last 250 years, there has not really been a difference between the keys in the way that there used to be. Before what's called tempered tuning of keyboards, every key actually sounded different. Some keys would be brighter, and some would be darker, and some would be more dissonant, because the pitches were actually in different ratios to each other, and they were actually out of tune with each other relative to other keys. And then, so you would actually say a march should be in D major, or something like that, and a love song should be in G or whatever. And it actually meant something before a certain point. But then when they, middle of the 18th century, they got the tempered tuning, well-tempered scales. They created more symmetry in the distances between the pitches, and every key would actually have the same sort of coloristic qualities. They wouldn't have these differences. So, but I don't know what I'm still drawn to A flat. I'm still drawn to D flat. It's just the rich, dark chocolate, kind of key. Doesn't make any sense, but there it is.
Right. So you're currently, or are you teaching right now? Are you doing any summer courses, or are you teaching any summer courses?
Yeah, I'm teaching a course at Oglethorpe right now called Music and Culture. Really great course. It's similar to a music appreciation course, but it also has a big cultural component, and where you're talking about music as an expression of culture and looking at music around the world, which is really great. What's less great is that we're 100% online right now.
Yes.
And
yeah,
I didn't know how much that was going to suck. I didn't know. I'm actually, I work from home and I'm an introvert. So there are all sorts of reasons why me sitting here doing my classes would seem to make sense. But first of all, I just miss the energy of the classroom. I mean, I do. The feedback that you're getting from seeing people, responding is important, and the ability to walk around and all that sort of, that's relatively trivial stuff. But the less trivial stuff is that all the spontaneity is gone. There are times when I would go, oh, you know what? There's a piece that illustrates that exactly, and I'd pull something up on the system. Can't do that anymore online. It's in part because the class I'm teaching is asynchronous, so everything is pre-taped, and it takes forever. First of all, it takes a really, really long time to create. And unfortunately, I've spent enough time working for online outlets now that I know how deadly online video is if you do it wrong. That it's not, you can get away with things in the classroom. You can get away with pauses and all that sort of thing in the classroom that you will not get away with on a video. If you start getting real stuttery and pausey, they will fast forward. You will be just like this all the way through the video. So I spend a lot more time editing and tightening and creating visuals that are going to keep their interest in addition to the playing the music. It's extremely time consuming. It's really, really time consuming. So we're going back into the classroom in a hybrid setup in the fall. I'm worried about that. Yeah, but I'm also, if we can do it safely. I mean, they're reconfiguring the classrooms in some pretty dramatic ways. They're even putting plexiglass shields between students so that they've got, because the classroom I teach in has long tables like this. And so they're all going to be in these sort of lines going back, but then plexiglass between them sitting at the same table. It's going to be really, and masked. It's going to be weird. But if we can do it safely, I'm eager to get off the online thing.
I get the impression it's a large lecture hall type of class that you're going to be teaching in.
Now, mine are relatively small. I mean, they ordinarily seat about 25. So yeah, the large lecture halls are less of a problem. They can actually spread them out. But for my classes, they're actually, the way they're doing the hybrid for classes of my size is half of them are going to come on Tuesday and the other half are going to watch online. So there's going to be a camera. And then on Thursday, they switch. So I don't have to create any additional content. They still get the spontaneity of the classroom, but half the time they're watching my spontaneity online. So anyway, it's gonna be fascinating and weird. I'm much more concerned about my wife and her colleagues. She's an elementary teacher, and that is much more of a difficult and nightmarish situation, I think, than college.
But what years does she teach?
Well, she actually teaches ESOL, English for Speakers of Other Languages. So she's drawing from several different grade levels, and she gets them for 45 minutes at a time, all the first graders for 45 minutes and that sort of thing. But the ones that she pulls in are just, it'll be 5 or 6 or 7 students frequently. And she's in a normal sized classroom. So she's able to much more comfortably spread them out. It's the regular classroom teachers that I think are going to have a hell of a time. I don't know what's going to happen with that.
I have one kid who is 15 and going to be a sophomore, starting in the fall. And I think the terror is just starting to seep in here, Dale. I mean, I work with people who are medically fragile. I work with people who have disabilities, and what kind of firewall can I have, right, between my kid, me, and the people who I work with? I've thought of anything crazy as like, maybe I'm just going to bag out. I got some money in my pocket. I can kind of stretch it out, until that's the thing. I don't know when's it going to end, right? When is the vaccine going to happen? Right. Will the first variety of vaccine be sufficient? Will it be offer enough protection?
Right.
It is something that is on my mind, and like I said, it's only July right now, and once again, I'm going to give my second thank my fictitious God. I'm in Massachusetts, and we have a governor that has a functioning head on his shoulders, and he's made some unpopular decisions, and hopefully he'll be comfortable making unpopular decisions in the fall too. I don't know.
Yeah.
Do you have kids in college right now? I know.
I have one who just finished college, and one. Yeah, thank you. And one who's starting at Georgia Tech. And it's really interesting because Georgia Tech was in the national news about this. The Georgia state system made this idiotic call. They said they're going to go back in person, but masks were going to be strongly encouraged. Well, you might as well not do it. So the Georgia Tech faculty and individual universities were not permitted to vary from that guideline. They all had to adhere to it exactly. You would think that like one college could say, we're going to go a little further and say they're mandatory, and they couldn't do it. Out of 1,100 faculty at Georgia Tech, 850 of them signed a letter. 850 out of 1,100 strongly objecting to this thing, and they got it changed. They got it changed at the state level. So now the masks are going to be mandatory. So she's headed back. She moves into the dorms in like 3 weeks or something. And so that's going to be interesting too. But they, Georgia Tech, it's a pretty smart place. They have their communications and all that just really give you confidence. They're thinking this through incredibly carefully, and they're creating COVID suites at the
Really?
yeah, isn't that it sounds like a vacation spot. But they're within the dorms. If anybody comes down with it, they're going to be able to effectively isolate them within the dorm and quarantine them, bring them meals and all that, and have them take their classes online during that period of time. So yeah, they've really it's so complicated. It's just incredible, but I have a lot of confidence in them. It's a weird situation to be in Georgia. So, there's Georgia Tech, lots of confidence. There's Georgia, the state, with our governor and all that, zero confidence. So
who's your governor down there?
Kemp. He's the one who said, for example, gosh, I just learned 24 hours ago that you can have the virus and not have any symptoms. He's the one who said that about like 5 weeks ago or something, when everyone knew that.
Right. Because you had it, and you had minimal symptoms for a while.
Well, this is what's interesting. I actually had the cough was pretty significant. Okay. And the fatigue was significant, but they passed relatively quickly. I only had those symptoms for a few days with any intensity. I didn't get the fever. I didn't get the blood ox problems. Right. But asterisk, I still got the cough. I am 3 months beyond the infection, and I still have coughing fits every day. Fatigue is gone, thank goodness. That's much worse. But I'm getting a doctor's appointment this week to go in and try to fix the cough. So they talk about the long tail of symptoms.
Yes.
And the fact that it can disappear and then come back. That's what happened with me. So I've got the cough, not as bad as it was at the peak, but 3 months out. I think, this Wednesday is 3 months after first infection. So anyway, it's unpredictable, and they still don't even know about long-term effects on various organs and all that, even if you have relatively mild symptoms at the time. So and then my daughter got it.
Oh, I had no idea.
She didn't get it from me. She got it 2 months later. What's that?
I had no idea she had
it. She got it just a few weeks ago, and so completely separate from mine, isolated at home, and she's out now and she's all right. But we're going to watch for her long-term symptoms as well. So it's a crazy time.
It's difficult to keep track of how many apocalypses are going on at any particular moment.
It's impossible. It's just impossible. And I think part of the problem is that it's really the numbing effect that it has is a real problem. The fact that we're no longer able to even react to things is a problem. We need to recover that ability when things normal up a little bit.
Yeah. Whenever that is. How does I know we were joking around this back. We've known each other for a while, or you probably say to yourself, "Yeah, I've known you unfortunately for a while, Andy." I remember back in 2016, during the election, Georgia. There was talk about Georgia swinging around to go on blue. How does it look right now in the state? Yeah,
it's Biden is stronger in Georgia than Clinton was. So it's a more likely swing state than Texas, and Texas is being talked about as a possible swing state. So the thing with Georgia is that Atlanta has always been quite blue. Going back into the civil rights movement, Atlanta was a hub of the civil rights movement and progressive activism. And as the population has grown, it's been the urban and suburban population around Atlanta that's grown obviously much faster than the rural population. Mm-hmm. So I think that simple sort of demographic shift, as much as anything, has been part of the reason. And it's definitely going to at least be close. And I think there's really an excellent possibility that Georgia goes blue this time. So
that'd be pretty awesome.
Yeah, it would. Bill Clinton, I think it was Bill Clinton who came within 1.5% in Georgia So yeah, it's not. That's the thing about the red state, blue state thing. With a few exceptions. Oklahoma is pretty decidedly red, and Massachusetts is pretty decidedly blue. But most everything else is purple, and it's just different shades of purple. And it's really, it has always been in Georgia within 5 or 6%, the two of them, and now it's within 1 or 2%. So it gives the wrong impression. We haven't overcome a completely red state. It's just a different shade of purple now.
Sure. How does the state government look? You were saying that the governor is an idiot, but is the legislature pretty much divided, or do the Dems have any real power there?
And they've got a lot of good people. Stacey Abrams came out of the state legislature, and it's much more encouraging. I think there's less. It's not the same kind of dynamic that we get with Congress and the Trump administration, where the Republicans in the legislature just monolithically back the governor. It's not that kind of a thing. But we also have lunatics. We also have the occasional somebody who's just completely grandstanding out on the fringe, and But no, it's really if there's something I want to see changed other than the people we send to Washington, it's the governor. That would be great.
Yeah. So we're about 45 minutes in. Before we start winding up, I want to ask something about, which is in your wheelhouse. If you're going to start giving tips, if you're going to give like a couple of tips on how to listen to music, right, instead of just shrugging your shoulders and saying, "Oh, I like it," but is there a particular process that I can get more bang out of my buck, or to deeper appreciate what I'm listening to? Well, what would you recommend?
Yeah, that's a really great question. One of the things.
Oh, I should let you know too, I have the tinnitus in my ears. It isn't going anywhere. It isn't increasing. It isn't decreasing. I've had tinnitus since I was 7 years old.
Oh,
so,
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Well, then find pieces in that key. That's the thing to do.
That's
well, when I would, what I talk to my students about is multiple listening. Multiple listening is a very big deal. Listen to something more than once. The first thing you have to do, though, is know what to listen to. So talk to people that you trust. Take somebody who has a really different taste in music compared to you, and is just raving about a particular artist or piece, and then go to it. What should I listen to first? And listen to it more than once. This is such an essential thing, because it's like, if you picture yourself, you're on a hike or something like that, and you hike through this canyon. That's a nice experience. The second time you hike through that canyon, you're going to see things that you saw before. You're going to remember things. You're going to start to develop a favorite spot. Oh, I love the view from this side, or whatever it is. And the third time through, it starts to become yours. It starts to really be something that's going to belong to you. It's exactly the same with a piece of music. The most dramatic example I had of that for myself was The Rite of Spring. When my brother was a music major as well. He was 4 years ahead of me. He was at Pomona College in California. So I'm in 9th grade or whatever, and he's a freshman. And he comes home and brings me the LP of The Rite of Spring and says, "I want you to listen to this thing." It's 30-minute ballet by Stravinsky. And he said, "Listen to this." And I put the headphones on and listened to it. And it was nonsense. It was complete. I mean, there was no organization. It was just absolutely complete random noises to me. And I told him that. And he said, "Listen again. Just right away, just get in there and listen again." And the second time through, it started to organize itself. I could start to, because I was re-encountering things. And then the third time through, I started to go, holy crap, this is an amazing piece of music. This is and now when I listen to it, I can't recapture the sense of chaos that I felt that first listen. It's completely organized. Every minute, every moment of that, I can sing it. I can sing The Rite of Spring. I can sing along with it and tap along with it and all that. So that's really one of the very, very big things for me. The other thing that I recommend, if you really want to deepen your listening, is to practice pulling elements out of the music. So you might listen to you see the cough? That's the...
Yeah.
You listen to a piece that you like, listen to a song, and only listen to the bass line. Don't follow anything else. Don't be distracted by anything else. Only listen to the bass line. And then you're going to listen through and only listen to the guitar. You're going to screen out everything else, only listen to the guitar. And then you only listen to the drums. Then you only listen to the singer or whatever it is. And that allows you to start to recognize that music is parts and layers. It's these different elements that are combining to create it. And then you back out again, you listen to the whole thing, and there's a richness to it that wasn't there before. That's also a way to start to discover some cool things that you might not have recognized before. Oh man, I'm a bass line person. I really, really love the bass. And then you can seek out other things that, Google great bass lines and you find other kinds of music. There is also an absolutely unbelievable website for discovering music. Spotify and Pandora and those sorts of things can be problematic because they have algorithms that feed you things that are similar to the things that you already like. That's fine and also problematic. But there's a website called Every Noise at Once, and it's not Every Noise at Once. I don't even know why they called it that, but it's everynoise.com is the URL, and on the homepage is this scatter plot of, I think it's 4,265 genres of music or something like that. And they're arrayed on a y-axis and x-axis. I did that backwards. According to characteristics, like from organic to mechanical, I think is one of them. And I can't remember what the other one is. But all the names are there in these clickable buttons. Oh. If you click on the genre, it will play a few seconds of an example from that genre. And if you click on the little arrow next to it, it'll take you to a different scatter plot of bands, artists that perform in that genre. And if you click on each one of those, you'll get a sample of their music. It's the most incredible exploration. And you wouldn't believe the name of some of these genres. They're absolutely amazing, garbage metal and, New Weird Finland is the name of an actual genre. But that's one that I always have my students do in the class. I say, spend a little time on this. There's also a scan button up at the top. You just click scan and it'll scan through the genres and play a few seconds from each one. It's just the best kind of exploration on this website. It's an amazing way to find new music.
I might just spend the afternoon after I take a nap, because I'm going to do, I might just spend the afternoon doing that. I might have a little drink too.
It's an absolute rabbit hole. It's fantastic. Yeah.
So Dale, the question I'm going to ask you. The question that I usually ask people is there a question you wanted me to ask you, but I didn't get to it? Was there a topic that you want to touch on, but we didn't get to it?
No, you know what? You do a fine job with this, sir. I didn't have anything particular in mind. It's always fun to talk about this podcast. Because the fact I get much more of a chance to talk about my sort of non-religious work and all that, and I've really had a ball getting back into the music in recent years after years kind of going in the other direction. So that's been great. I appreciate that.
Yeah. What I really like about how music does that is that it is the deep structure of music, and there's a lot of things I didn't know.
And great. Oh, that's perfect. Yeah, that's great to hear. And the fact is, there's a lot of stuff in it that I didn't know until I started researching it. So that's the reason I love this. If I could do one thing out of all the stuff that I do, if I could do one thing for the rest of my life, it would be this. Because I land on a topic, and I'm working on an episode called As White as Classical. And it's all about, just how blindingly white classical music is. And initially I was going to sort of show that, demonstrate that, and, talk about a couple of Black composers. But then I started really encountering the reason that it's that way. The systemic situation, and it became a much more interesting episode. So it's also going to take me a whole lot longer to put together. But that happens more often than not. I start an episode thinking I know what it's going to be about, and it goes in a different direction. So
I am sure that there's a certain amount of editing that you have to. There's pruning. There's pruning that you have to do. Yeah. These episodes, because you could have easily, because each episode is about a half an hour or so.
20 minutes, something like that. Yeah.
Very manageable. But you could easily just go on and on and on with these topics. The Beethoven one just comes to mind. The podcast is up for an award too. I put the link for people to click on and to vote for how music does that. It's a People's Choice Award?
Yeah, thanks. Thanks for mentioning that. People's Choice Podcast Award. The listener nominations are going on right now through the end of July. And it's in the Coverville PodSafe music category. They've got these sponsored categories, but it's a music category. And if anybody wants to, if you listen to the podcast and like it and you want to go to podcastawards.com and nominate, that would be great.
Fantastic. Dale McGowan, where can people find you online, sir?
Online, you can start at dalemcgowan.com and it goes out from there.
It just goes just like that.
It just goes and goes. Yeah.
All right. Well, thanks everyone on the chat that came in. I hope everyone got their questions answered. I think they did. Thanks for listening. Dale, it's always fun to talk with you. I learn stuff and I get to ask questions that under normal circumstances, I don't get to ask.
Yeah, well, I appreciate the invitation. I always love it.
It's fantastic, dude. All right, well, be good, be safe. Everyone in the chat too, right? Everyone, well, being good isn't as important as being safe, but you know what I'm saying. All right, take care, everyone.
That's right.
Yeah, and